quick background of who I am and how we got to Galveston, and also as we dissect a little bit of Scripture today. The next Scripture I'll read, just give you a heads up, it won't be on the screen because I did not give it to Kel in time, but it'll be Isaiah 58, 6 through 8, and then verse 10. So if you want to go ahead and get there, we'll be there in a minute. So as I said in the video, my parents moved into the inner city of Waco, Texas. Waco is 34% impoverished. That is over 3 times the national level. That's crazy. You've got Baylor University, the largest Baptist university in the universe, less than a mile away, one of the highest percentages of poverty ever. It's crazy. So I was the minority in my neighborhood with me and my brothers. We grew up with prostitutes on the corner, with drive-bys, with drug deals, with gang members. Those were things that were part of my lifestyle growing up. People say all the time, well, Josh, how was it? Well, I don't know any different. And so I could say the same thing to you. How was it growing up in the suburbs? Or how was it growing up where you might have come from? And so we're doing the same thing now with my kids. So my wife and I, in 2010, moved to Galveston. So from Waco, loved the city that I was in, went to college there, had lots and lots of friends there, but God had a bigger plan for us. And so my wife and I got married in 2005, and about 2007, we heard God call us to North India. So we sold the house that we had bought, inner city Waco. We bought our first house in the inner city for $20,000. Location. Had to put about $20,000 into it to make it functional. My wife was the children's director at Mission Waco. I was the volunteer recruiter and GED director and job trainer and all sorts of other things that we do within nonprofits. And so we loved the community. We did block parties with our neighbors. We advocated to the city to get new street lights put in because our street had no street lights, so it was completely dark at night. Things like that we got to do, just about being a loving community member. And so, anyway, invested, thought we'd be there a lot longer, and then God showed my wife and I both in dreams that we needed to be somewhere else. Now, I have never had a dream like that to kind of spur me onto those things. So it was very weird for me. My wife and I were having to dissect this and read Scripture and get lots of counseling because we weren't sure what was going on. But we knew that we were supposed to be in a place where there were not many Christians. And so almost a year to the date of those dreams, my wife and I landed in New Delhi on my 25th birthday. We knew that we were supposed to be there and be among a Muslim people group. And so we moved to Kashmir and lived there for 2 years. If you don't know where Kashmir is, it's kind of the northern tip of India. It's 98% Muslim, about 1 million in the city, and about 12 million in the kind of the metropolis of that community. Less than 1% Christian, and so our job was just to build relationships, get to know people. We invested, we learned language, we did all the things that we're supposed to do as missionaries. We sold everything we had in Waco, and then God called us back to the U.S. Clearly, God had to show me some things that I was not ready for in Waco, and the challenge with that was when you move overseas, people throw parties for you, they pat you on the back, they send you out with a huge support. When you choose to move inner city, people think you're an idiot. And it literally is. When you choose to move across the tracks in your own in America, people think you're dumb. Those people don't deserve it. They're not worthy. But you go over to India, you go over to Africa, you go to China, and people pat you on the back. So this is a struggle. So we'd already been patted on the back going to India, right? We had a great celebration. We didn't know exactly where we were supposed to go. From India, and so I got into a program at Trinity Evangelical in North Chicago. So I finished my master's in seminary there. Loved it. Interned on the west side of Chicago, which was the new South Chicago. About 50,000 people in that neighborhood. So Galveston, 50,000 people on the island, 50,000 people in this neighborhood. So I interned at a church called Lawndale Community Church, and they have been doing what they call Christian community development for the last probably 30 years. Doing a fantastic job. So my job was to work with the guys coming out of prison and guys going through recovery. And so my first day on the job, I sit across from a guy who just spent the last 40 years in prison. 40 years. I was 27 at the time. We're sitting there, the intercom goes off, and he gets startled and goes, "What's that?" 4 decades he's gone. He does not know basic things like the intercom system. It was wild and continued to open up my mind to the things that happen in urban impoverished areas. And so while I was there was 120 homicides in the 6 months I interned in that neighborhood. 120. Mostly African-American males. You guys remember Sandy Hook, right? Huge travesty. International news. 26, mostly Caucasian kids. International news. 120 African-American men barely made the newspaper. This is a social injustice. Both travesties. Don't hear me say anything other than that. But something happens when we look at people in communities like the ones I've served in and the ones I live in that says, that's what they do. They deserve that. Their bad choices caused this. We begin pointing fingers. And it rubs me the wrong way. One, because I grew up in a neighborhood like that. And so I am a product of a neighborhood like that. But we stand in the church. And we love and we can sing, we can do these things, and the world is broken because so few people in the church are engaged in that kind of community. Let me stop real quick and give 2 disclaimers. I should have done this already. 1, I love the church with all my heart. I believe this is what Jesus came to do. 2, we're saved by faith through grace, right? Okay, so anytime I start getting kind of hard on the church is because I see a giant gaping hole in the communities, and I see a strong church, but for some reason they're not crossing over very often. And so I want to challenge the church, not just this church, but the church, right? The Big C church across America. So let me read in Isaiah 58. We'll start in verse 6. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him, and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call on the Lord, and he will answer, and you will cry for help, and he will say, here am I. If you do away with the yoke of the oppression, with the pointing finger and the malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in the sun-scorched land, and will strengthen your frame, and you'll be a well-watered garden like a spring whose waters never fail. If your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations, you will be called repairers of the broken walls, restorer of the streets with dwellings. That's what I want to be. I want to be somebody that people look at and say, we're rebuilding the walls, rebuilding the foundations to communities that are broken. This is what Jesus is talking about when he reads the scrolls from Isaiah, talking about caring for those who are in need. This is what he's talking about. Sometimes we don't see ourselves as people who are supposed to be community engagers. We're supposed to be people who spend time with our Christians and love the one another's. And absolutely we are. But we're also called to the broken world. Please don't hear me pointing a finger at you. That's not what I'm doing. But the neighborhood I live in, we'll talk just kind of briefly about some of the things that are going on. I never want to highlight the brokenness of my community, but if we don't talk about it, sometimes we don't always understand the needs. The median income in my 20 by 5 block radius is $9,000 per year. Galveston as a whole is $36,000. League City is $86,000. Clear Lake is $96,000 per year. 25 exits and almost a $80,000 disparity from my neighborhood. Is that just? Is that fair? The kids in those pictures you saw, they did not choose to be born in that community, did they? We are 3 and 4 generations now in my neighborhood where people have lived in that community and have never gotten out of it. And as I said at the beginning of the video, our dream and our vision without Christ's help will not come to fruition. But it's to make my community be one that people want to move into instead of get out of. That's how we repair the walls and begin to repair the broken streets. We move in and we make it our home and we invest. You guys heard the term incarnational ministry, or how Jesus was the incarnation, right? So Jesus in flesh, God came to earth, right? Heaven, perfect and beautiful. The earth, broken and corrupt. God moved to the hood. That's what he did, right? And that's probably maybe a little stretch, but that's the idea of what happens. Too often, we want to create little safe zones for our families, and that's okay. When I moved into the neighborhood, people say, Josh, what about your daughter? So we moved in. My daughter was 2. She's blonde hair, blue-eyed. Does not look like most of my neighbors. people are fearful for her. They are not fearful for those kids in the pictures. That is wrong. That is unjust. We should be just as concerned for my daughter as we are for the kids in the projects. And that doesn't happen. We have to be men and women who stand differently and look differently from Scripture and show that to the world. So we've talked about the idea of a worthy life. Please don't look at me and think, oh, Josh has got the worthy life, right? Please don't for 1 second think that. We could bring my wife up for another discussion on those things. But I love my community. I love what God's called us to. But how we got to Galveston is another quick crazy story. So finishing seminary, we knew we were supposed to do urban ministry. We had kind of some seed money set up for us to kind of reduplicate what Mission Waco, the community I worked in before, to kind of duplicate that model. We had no idea where to go, literally no clue. We could pick anywhere. So I'm thinking, okay, I've had time in Chicago, I've had time in Waco. We could go anywhere from 100,000 to 13 million. We could go anywhere in there. Praying, fasting, doing all the things we do to get God to talk to us, right? When we really need Him to talk to us, we start doing all these things. And so I was out for a jog one afternoon, and about halfway before I turned around to my halfway spot, I heard God say in my innermost being, I can't explain any other way than that, Galveston is the place. I love that we serve an alive God who interacts with us and speaks to us. Clearly, I'm slow that God has to take me to India to teach me something. He has to take me to seminary to learn some more things, and He has to literally tell me exactly where to go so I can get it. Finished seminary on a Monday, and we're living there in Galveston on June 3rd, 2010, that Saturday. When you know what you're supposed to do and you don't do it, it becomes sin. My testimony from another time, I started drinking and using drugs about 15, about 6 years straight of complete debauchery, and then God got a hold of me and just shook me until I understood what He was doing. He's had to do that with me multiple times because I'm a slow learner, but luckily we have a God that is very gracious, and it's good. So in Galveston, I'm going to share a couple stories now with you about people from my community and talking about the contrast to what a worthy life looks like. So my buddy Danny lives next door with his family. There's apartments everywhere in my community. My family, and my neighbor, direct neighbor, were the only two homeowners in over 4 blocks. How do you build a solid community with no homeowners in a community? So Danny lives with about 8 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. One afternoon, Danny came up to me, one night, I was taking the trash out, which is 30 feet from my front door, and it took me over about 45 minutes to get inside. So my wife's like, what happened out there? And so she pokes her head out, and Danny and I are doing what I call front yard discipleship. So Danny comes up to me and shares a little bit about his history. Him and some of his cousins, when they were young, were playing with the gun, and it went off when he was holding it, and he killed one of his cousins. He now knows he is someone who has taken someone's life. It was an accident, it wasn't intentional, but it became a big deal for their family. So he lives with this deep guilt, and it shows in the way he drinks alcohol and uses drugs. Every morning by 7:30 a.m., he is either high or drunk every morning. So one day, Danny and I are talking, and we're trying to help him understand Bible stories, and we're just going through the stuff that we do on a regular basis. And so one day, Danny looked at me and goes, Josh, I'm a man of God, but I'm going to do what I do. And it was like my stomach turned. It was such an affront to what I believe the Holy Spirit calls us to. Like I literally didn't know what to say at that moment. I had a meeting off the island that day, and so I was driving on the causeway. My stomach just hurt based on that idea. And as I'm processing that, I'm realizing that's the world. I'm a man of God, but I'm going to do what I do. We give ourselves out constantly to do what we want to do and ignore this book. This is truth, not culture. Culture is shifting constantly. This is truth. And so I knew I had to confront Danny on this, and this was not going to be a fun thing. He's ex-gangbanger. He is still currently a part of the Bloods. Danny cares about me and respects me, but it's also something that you don't always have a whole lot of confidence in doing. And so I pulled him aside when it was just him. He was in between kind of sober moments. I said, Danny, I need to mention something to you. A couple weeks you said that you were a man of God, but you're going to do what you do. I said, that is not the Christian faith. This is not what we believe. This is not truth. Oh, yeah, Josh. I know, Josh. I know. and he goes back on his way. We pray for Danny all the time, and I invite you to pray for Danny as well. That is not a made-up name. That is really his name. So please be in prayer for Danny, that he will understand truth. Carrie is a family we've been working with now for about 4 years. As I mentioned, the videos was made at the end of last summer, so we've been there about 5 years now. So Carrie, we probably met within the first 6 months or so. Her kids were in our after-school kids program and our we call Backyard Bible Club or Kids Club. Every Saturday morning, we go out to the projects and we do VBS every Saturday. We just call it Kids Club. It's a little bit shorter. It's an absolute blast, and it's a great way to get involved in our ministry. So we want to invite you to come do that with us at some point. When we first started GUM, or Galveston Urban Ministries, my wife and I was like, we got to start. So we went out to the apartment complex, and we did it. We call Kids Club. And so we get out there. My wife and I, and our daughter was 2. 42 children showed up. Not one adult asked us who we were. Nobody asked why we were playing with their children, giving them hugs, teaching them Bible stories, playing games, doing snacks. No one asked us a thing. This is something we have to deal with and work on. So knowing that there's 42 kids, we had to go get help as fast as we can. And so we go to A&M Galveston and so start recruiting kids from there that are Christians. And that's actually how Kel and I begin to kind of cross paths more and more. And so anyway, so we meet Carrie and her family. She's got Caleb, and then they call her Suge Mama, which is the baby, and Chris is the oldest one. She is one of the only married couples that I had ever met in this entire apartment complex, the only married couple in the entire apartment complex with over 250 units. Kids and babies everywhere, not one married couple except this one. So one afternoon, Carrie lets one of her neighbors borrow her car. They go to Walmart, they steal things, they come back, cops show up at Carrie's door because it's her car. They know it's not her because they saw who got in and out of the car. She ended up having to kind of share who it was so that she doesn't get in more trouble. Also in my community, that apartment complex has over 200 phone calls to the police every month. Every month. So when the cops get called and they hear the address, which is 3911 Winnie, people do not get excited, especially the police. And so cops show up, go to the guy's house that she kind of told on. They get belligerent and come after Carrie, start threatening her and her family. She had to protect her family, so she grabbed the bat that was by there, hit the guy, blood, cops get called again. Carrie now ends up in jail for defending her family for over 6 months. She was supposed to be in for 3. Extra 3 months for no reason other than she didn't have right representation. And so she lost 3 more months with her kids. Again, kids are in AB Honor Roll. They're in National Junior Honor Society. All of these things. This is the family that you want to like highlight. Her husband ends up leaving her. Kids end up living with dad. Carrie gets out, has nothing. So we see Carrie, and her kids were in our programs, but when her dad moved, or the husband moved, our kid's dad, we kind of lost them in our program, so they weren't in our after-school program anymore, and so it's so hard for us. So I'm picking my daughter up from school one day, and I see Carrie, she's out. I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to go get her. So I call my children's director. As a married male, spending a lot of time with unmarried females is not always the strongest opportunity for me to show my witness. And so I call my children's director, and she goes and gets Carrie, and we start getting engaged. She joins our job training program. Our kids get back in our program. And over this is over about a year time frame. She starts going to church with us. I went to go pick her up at our new place of residence. She'd been in about 6 places in 7 months. She would literally have to go get her kids off the school bus, and then she would take them to their new home where they're living. As part of our ministries, we don't ever do too much for someone to where somebody becomes dependent on us, right? We support and we stand with, but if we do too much, then people kind of expect dependency, right? Does that make sense? So we try to stay away from that. So I go pick her up, and I say, now, Carrie, how many people are living in this house? 3-bedroom house, 23 people in one house. So we said, Carrie, we need to start working towards some better solutions. And so we help her get her cosmetology license. We start standing with her and all sorts of other things. She now has a job, paid her own rent for the first time in her life. She sent me a text one morning about 6 a.m. She said, Justin, I just want you to know what God has done in my life, what you've done for our family, and what your ministry has done. Now, I've got a staff of over 11 people now. When we first started, it was me, and I worked 2 part-time jobs, and then slowly we added people. It took everyone on our staff at some level to be engaged in this family's life to help her out. So sometimes when we look at charity or doing things, we kind of say, well, I gave $5 to the guy on the street. And that's good. But does that really change things? Not really. It might give a glimpse of hope. It might buy a sandwich. It might buy another bottle of beer. It might do all sorts of things, right? But it doesn't really change things. In Deuteronomy, there's this idea of serving the poor and standing with people. You go from where they're at to more of this self-sufficiency, less dependency on the government's assistance kind of thing. That's the model we use. You guys heard of gleanings from the harvest? Right? So the Old Testament idea, if I'm a landowner, I have to leave the four corners and anything dropped. And then the poor are able to go get it themselves. What kind of model does that look like? Does it look like our current government system? No, it doesn't. So what happens is then the rich don't squeeze every ounce that they can out of their business, and there's some extra for other people. And they went and did the work, right? So that's the model of ministry we use. That's called empowerment or developmental ministry. There's relief-based. That's going to be things like soup kitchens or clothes closets. Those things are not wrong. Those are not, they're great. But we focus more on the development side. We want to help people from where they're at to where they want to go. And so with Carrie, that's exactly what we did. And it took over a year for us to see some glimpses of hope. But she now has her own apartment with her kids back in her home, and she's doing great. That's how lives are changed, and we begin to restore the foundations. These kids now in Carrie's home are going to know what it means to watch a mom or a parent who works and works hard to take care of their family. Many of our families don't have that. Like I said, we're 3 and 4 generations now of families who have not worked and have been dependent on the government. It's a broken system. It was well-meaning, but guess what? The church's mandate is to care for the poor. There's over 2,000 verses in this book, the Bible, that tells us to care for the poor, the marginalized, the outcast. Next to love, this is one of the main themes from start to finish in this book. And without love, we can't do that. We have a call to the poor. After the Great Depression, we began to give more of our responsibility as the church. We gave it away to the government, and the government didn't know how to do it in a loving and just way. And now you fast forward about 80 years, and look where we're at. So part of the issue and the problems that we're in is because the church has not done its job. The national average for churches who would they give away to the poor is less than 1%. Our churches are giving less than 1% away to the poor. We kind of ask what of you guys, though? 10%, right? So I want to challenge churches. Again, I'm not saying this church. Don't hear me say things negatively about this specific church, but I'm talking about the church, less than 1%. That means our tithe goes to serve us and those within the 4 walls. We've got to challenge that because I want to make sure that we understand the poor is our responsibility. We've got to care for the poor. It is our job as Christians. Jesus' opening mission statement to the world is saying exactly that. Stand for the poor. Teach them the good news of the gospel and watch things begin to change. So as we've built our ministry, that's what we've been doing. We share our faith on a regular basis. It doesn't always look clean and neat. It doesn't always make a lot of sense, but we're there and we're invested. And when you invest in a community, you buy a house, you build a ministry, you do those things in a community, you have ownership in that. And you don't just say, well, I tried hard, see ya. No, our lives are invested in this. And that's this idea of incarnational ministry. When I gave my life to Christ, I gave it up to him. He's always working on me. He's always changing things in me. But I gave it up, and it's his life to do with as he pleases, not mine. I'll tell you another story about Tina and Bull. Tina, I met her the first day. Her daughter's name is Roniquel. We call her Nini because that's a hard name to pronounce on a regular basis or when you're yelling at her for getting in trouble. And so we're working with her family. Their daughter is built like a track star. She is so fit. She has incredible balance. The first time she ever paddleboarded, she just jumped on it and didn't even touch the water. I mean, just has this natural ability. And so I see Roniquel's mom one day, and I said, hey, just want to tell you how much fun we had with her today, and we just love her being around. And mom's like, okay. That was it. No, thanks for hanging out with my kid, none of this. So we fast forward about 4 years. Her older brother was in and out of rehabs, in and out of jail. He'd been out for 6 months, and he overdoses on PCP. There's a drug called WET in Galveston, which is liquid PCP. It is jacking up our community. It's horrible stuff. I call it like the shark eyes. somehow it's mixed in with embalming fluid. Horrible stuff. And so people are ODing on a regular basis. And so her brother did. They found him under the bridge at 51st Street it looked like he drowned in about 6 inches of water. So they find out Tina is just beside herself. That's the mom. So they call the school and let her know. So the school calls my youth director to go pick up their daughter. They don't call the mom when they find out. They call my youth director because she's engaged and there on a regular basis. I love that about my staff. So Caitlin goes to pick up Roniqua. They talked to her about it for a minute and said, hey, I just want you to know your brother passed away. And she goes, oh, can we go to McDonald's? It was like this process of not even able to truly understand what had just happened. So Caitlin, of course, not knowing what to do, just went to McDonald's. They picked food up, and she brought her over to our building that day and just helped her do her homework and kind of process some things with her. It gave us great opportunities to take food and just be engaged in this family's life. Now, if we don't live in the neighborhood and our buildings are not right there, it can be very challenging for people outside to know how to understand these kinds of issues. And so nobody looks forward to these moments, but you have to step into the pain, right? True compassion means to suffer with. Right? If I'm sick in the hospital and you come and go, oh, I'm sorry, and then walk out, did you suffer with me? Is that really compassion? No. You might be able to check it off the list that I did a visit, but it's not real compassion. And so when we enter into this pain, it hurts. I've never wept so much as living in Galveston. It breaks my heart, the things that are happening. Tina still uses PCP. The same thing that killed her son, she is still using because she is so addicted. I bet I've seen her sober 3 times in the last 2 years. Breaks my heart. We took our youth to camp last Sunday, and so we're trying to get our kids going. Now, Roniqua now grows up in this house where her mom is always loaded. Bull, the boyfriend / father / other things, is the local dope dealer. They've had their door kicked in multiple times with they call them the jump out boys of the SWAT team. Happens on a regular basis. This is Roniqua and her little brothers and sisters. This is their normal life. This happens on a regular basis. This is not something that happens once that they saw on TV. This is a daily occurrence for them. So Roniqua is literally raising herself. She stays between 4 different homes: her aunt, her friends, her mom, or her grandmother. So at any time of the week, we don't know where she is. Her mom doesn't know where she is unless she's in her care. Roniqua is 12, right? This is chaotic. We called CPS, and CPS said, there's really nothing we can do at this time. After that happened, it's like, I wanted to flip the table over and be done, right? Like, it's that kind of frustration. And it's not that we want people to get in trouble. We are not family destroyers. We want the best for her. And if somebody doesn't engage and help her out, we can't do that. So Roniqua's packing her bags, trying to go to camp. Again, she's 12, trying to get herself ready for camp. So she starts finding all her clothes that she has, and they're all wet, and she starts packing them in her backpack. My youth director shows up and says, no, sweetie, we cannot pack wet clothes. We'll take care of this, but we cannot pack wet clothes. So we have to go back into Tina's house and help her get things done. And eventually you see Tina kind of coming to, and she's, for the first time ever, I see her being a parent to this little girl. She's helping her lay her clothes out. We're supposed to leave at 1 o'clock. This is now at 1:30. We operate on Island Time Plus. And so we have people who are driving us, and it was just one of those moments of urban ministry. But it was one of the first times ever I watched the parent engage. And Tina looked at me and goes, I wish I could go to camp sometime. This lady has never been to camp. She's never gotten to do the fun things we're taking her child on. So it's that constant reminder for us that not only can we work with the kids, we've got to work with the adults. And we've got to recreate some things for them that they've never had an opportunity to. Now, the Tina and Bull story goes deeper than that. So one day, I don't wear collared shirts very often. Usually I'm in shorts and T-shirt. I thought I'd dress up for the mainland. I wasn't sure what the code was here today. So my youth director calls me one day, and I'm literally going to a meeting with all the other executive directors from Galveston. And so anyway, so my youth director texts me real quick, says, hey, I need you at Tina's. So my first response is, are you there? Because if she's there, then it means I have to engage in a different way. If she's not there, we can push it off. She goes, yes, I'm here. So I literally have to sprint across, so my office is right here. I have to sprint across this field to get over there as fast as I can. My volunteer director, his name's Brandon, and Caitlin are inside. Tina had cheated on Bull. Bull is about me and Kel merged together. He's a big fella. And so he is belligerent. Caitlin is standing with Tina in the back. They're loading everything they have in trash bags. And I wanted to have a moment of videotaping that kind of thing so she could process later, your life is in garbage bags. Look what's going on. Of course, we can't do that in the moment. And so we're talking to her. I'm trying to calm him down. And so because I live in the neighborhood, they know who we are, and we've stood with them now for the last 4 years. We've hurt with them. We've cried with them. There's a respect. And so I walk in, and I can just put my hand on Bull. Again, he's a big guy, and he starts calming down. You can feel, we're just kind of in that inward prayer of, Lord Jesus, we don't know what we just got into. And it's constantly going on. So Tina's finally getting out, and I stand in front of Bull. Tina's walking out, and she's still frustrated, and she pushes the television over, and Bull charges. And I literally had to wrap him up and put him against the wall so that Tina can get out and be okay. Now, in hindsight, we all put ourselves in a really stupid situation, right? At the moment, we had to engage to make sure Tina, the local dope head, drunk, is taken care of. We had to stand with her, and it's painful, and it hurts. We get everybody out of there. I hold Bull back for as long as I can, and then they get Tina away, and they call the police and take care of all those things. But I come back in, and my staff is just, they're shaking. She's shaking, doesn't know what to do. She's crying. I literally have to go to this meeting. I pray for it, and I have to walk out. So I show up to this executive director's meeting, and they go, so Josh, how's your day? Well, it's good, because you cannot dissect it. And it literally took about 3 days for all of us to kind of get out of that mess. When Christ entered the world, he intersected this kind of pain, and he didn't run away from it. He didn't go live in a community that was safe with a big fence around it. He engaged the pain. That's what God's called me to. Man, it hurts some days. I hate that drive-bys affect my children, and we've had to push them on the floor at times. I hate that, but I hate it for my neighbor's kids. It's not okay that those things happen. It's not okay that it happens in front of my kids, and it's not okay that it happens in front of my neighbor's kids. But if the Christians don't engage those communities, it will not change. This is our responsibility. It's what God has called me to. I love what we do, and I love my city. Again, we don't highlight the negative things to focus on, how bad it is. But people need to understand what goes on in those kind of communities. And when there's a drive-by, it's like, yeah, it just happens. No, it's not okay. No, that's not supposed to happen. When kids are abused on a regular basis, no, it's not okay. But if we don't see it and engage it and touch it, we don't feel it the same way. Christ has asked us to enter into the pain. That's part of what he's called us to do. Yeah, we can celebrate, and there's still joy filled within me because of Christ. Because if I let the world dictate everything I did, man, I'd be beat up. My marriage would be in shambles, and he knows what would be going on with my kids. But there's joy in this. So I share those stories, and I share what's going on. Let me tell you a few more things that's happening in our neighborhood right now. So we have this need for more Christian community development, and the way that happens is by having Christians move into our community. But in my neighborhood, there aren't a lot of great houses. We bought the current house I'm living in now for $34,000. Had to put about $25,000 into it to make it functional. My friends call it the camo house because the outside looks like the neighborhood and the inside has been completely redone so that my wife will not leave me. And so, like I said, we're the only homeowners, so we need more homeowners to come in. So as we've been talking about this and praying about it, some of our church partners and other friends have said, well, how do we do that? What does that look like? And I said, honestly, to take back this community, we need more people to be invested. And so within about a year and a half, almost $350,000 has come in just for property to be purchased. I've asked for maybe $50,000 of that. $350,000 has come in. And don't hear me say that we're perfectly funded. Don't hear me say that ever. However, we just bought 3 houses that are side by side, 1 block from the projects. The reason the 3 houses were so ideal for me is because that way it's not people doing it alone. My wife and I have had to kind of pioneer into the community. We've been doing it by ourselves, and it's hard. So we wanted to create a place where people can come together. And so now we've got 3 houses that are literally all side by side with 2 vacant lots right behind it that we're going to fence off and create a Christian community living center so that we can help families like Tasha who are coming up. And by the way, Tasha has asked me to marry her and her boyfriend that are currently living together. Huge win for us, right? So helping Tasha rebuild her life while some of my staff lives next door to her. And we'll have kind of the 75-25 model, meaning 75% what I call stable families, families who are actively living in their faith. They can be on staff with GUM, or they can just be invested in the community. But they have to be intentionally a part of our community. I've got 3 houses, and I've already got about 5 people waiting for those houses to be rehabbed. There's probably about another year's worth of work before they're ready. But we're so excited about moving more Christians into the community. As we're working on that project, literally behind the fence of those houses, there's a church that's not doing very well. And they said, hey, are you guys interested in buying this church? Absolutely. So we buy that this coming week. We're literally taking back an entire block that has been drug use, prostitution, crack pipes. It's been uninhabited, and now GUM is taking it back. And on the next corner, we just bought another 3,000 square foot house. That'll be our new offices. So we now own this block of community that has just been completely abandoned and broken, and we get to be people who restore it. That's where we need people like you who can come in and use your skills and abilities to help us restore these properties, hang sheetrock, paint walls, whatever your skill sets might be. We can't do that without the body. So we're an urban ministry, but we'll call ourselves a parachurch ministry, which means side by side with the church. Without church involvement or engagement, we don't exist. We have for the last 2 years, we've had over 100,000 volunteer hours by Christians. We've been around for 4.5 years. God is doing some big things on the island, and it's so fun to be on the front end of it. And so we want to invite people to be a part of that with us. So while I covered a whole bunch of stuff, all right, I talked about a lot of things, I shared a lot of stories. Without Christ, we are nothing. If Christ does not change our community, it will not change. It is not going to be by my work, by my sweat. We will work hard and we'll be diligent, but it won't be by my efforts. It'll be because Jesus engages our community. And we ask the Christian body to do it with us. We're grateful for what God's called us to. We're grateful that we get to be invited to churches to share our story, to talk about what it means for us to live a life that we believe is worthy to Christ. Again, it's not by my works, but because of my faith, we do these things. Pray with me. Lord Jesus, we are so grateful.